There is a bleeding that occurs in silence, a hemorrhaging of the soul that leaves no visible trace upon the body. You feel it in the hollow spaces between heartbeats, in the weight that settles upon your chest when you wake at 3 in the morning, staring into darkness that seems to stare back. This is not the sharp pain of a broken bone or the obvious wound of a severed artery. This is something far more insidious, far more complete in its devastation. The ancient Greeks knew of this bleeding. They called it the wound of Philoctetes, the hero abandoned on a desolate island, nursing a festering injury that would not heal, that made him unbearable to others and yet essential to their victory. You carry such a wound, though you may have forgotten when it first opened. Perhaps it began in childhood, when you learned that parts of yourself were unacceptable, that certain truths could not be spoken, that certain dreams were too dangerous to pursue. Perhaps it opened later, in the crushing disappointment of discovering that the adult world demanded the sacrifice of your authentic self on the altar of conformity. Jung understood this bleeding intimately. He called it the sacrifice of the natural self to the demands of civilization, the slow crucifixion of spontaneity on the cross of social expectation. But what he discovered through his own dark night of the soul was that these wounds are not merely pathological symptoms to be cured. They are initiations, doorways into the deeper mysteries of becoming human. You live your days unconscious of the hemorrhaging, constructing elaborate defenses against the awareness of what you have lost. The ego, that brilliant architect of survival, builds magnificent structures to protect you from the knowledge of your own wounding. It erects the persona, that carefully crafted mask you wear in public, and convinces you that this false face is your true identity. It develops habits and patterns, repetitive behaviors that serve as psychic tourniquets, temporarily stopping the bleeding but never addressing the source of the wound. These unconscious habits become the rivers through which your life force flows away from you. They are the small daily betrayals of your deeper nature, the 1,000 tiny compromises that accumulate like sediment in the soul. The way you automatically reach for your phone when silence threatens to reveal the emptiness within. The way you fill every moment with noise and activity, terrified of what you might discover in stillness. The way you seek validation from others because you have forgotten how to validate yourself. But here is the sacred paradox that Jung discovered in his own journey through the underworld of the psyche. The wound that seems to weaken us is actually the source of our greatest strength. The bleeding that appears to drain us is actually a form of sacred release, clearing away what is false so that what is true can emerge. The habits that seem to diminish us are unconscious attempts at healing, misguided perhaps, but arising from the soul's innate wisdom. In the mythology of the wounded healer, it is precisely the one who has been broken who becomes capable of healing others. Chiron, the centaur accidentally wounded by one of Heracles' poisoned arrows, could heal everyone except himself. And yet it was through his own incurable wound that he gained the wisdom to guide others toward wholeness. You too are both the wounded one and the potential healer, both the patient and the physician in the great work of individuation. The invisible wounds you carry are not evidence of your failure, but proof of your sensitivity, your refusal to become completely numb to the violence that civilization inflicts upon the soul. They are the stigmata of consciousness, the marks of one who has dared to feel deeply in a world that often rewards emotional numbness. They are the price of remaining human in systems designed to transform you into a mechanism of productivity. But recognition is the first step toward healing. To see the wound is to begin the journey toward wholeness. To acknowledge the bleeding is to start the process of conscious transformation. The habits that drain you are not your enemies. They are your teachers, pointing toward the unhealed places within your psyche, showing you exactly where your attention and compassion are most needed. This is why you must descend before you can ascend, why you must journey into the underworld of your own unconscious before you can claim your place in the light. The spiritual traditions of the world all acknowledge this fundamental truth, that death precedes rebirth, that dissolution precedes integration, that the seed must be buried in darkness before it can reach toward the sun. The work that lies before you is not easy. It requires the courage to face what you have spent a lifetime avoiding, the willingness to feel what you have learned to numb, the commitment to truth even when that truth is inconvenient or painful. It demands that you become an archaeologist of your own soul, carefully excavating the buried treasures of your authentic self from beneath layers of conditioning and compromise. But this work is also the most sacred task you will ever undertake. It is the hero's journey made real, the mythic quest for wholeness translated into the concrete reality of your daily existence. It is the alchemical transformation of lead into gold, the metamorphosis of the caterpillar into the butterfly, the resurrection of what appeared to be dead into new and eternal life. The invisible wounds you carry are not your weakness. They are your doorway to depth, your invitation to authenticity, your call to the great work of becoming who you truly are. The bleeding that seems to drain you is actually preparing you for rebirth, clearing away the false so that the true can emerge. The habits that appear to diminish you are unconscious attempts at healing, primitive forms of medicine that have outlived their usefulness and now require conscious transformation. You stand at the threshold now, at the beginning of the journey from unconscious wounding to conscious healing, from automatic habit to deliberate choice, from the prison of the false self to the freedom of authentic being. The path ahead is difficult but not impossible, mysterious but not incomprehensible, sacred in its very ordinariness. The soul's silent hemorrhage has brought you here, to this moment of recognition, this instant of seeing. Now the real work begins. In the theater of daily existence, you have become both actor and audience, performer and critic, yet you have forgotten which role is authentic and which is mere performance. The mask you donned so long ago to navigate the treacherous waters of social acceptance has grown into your skin, fused with your flesh until you can no longer tell where the performance ends and your true face begins. Jung called this mask the persona, from the Latin word meaning to sound through, like the masks worn by actors in ancient Greek theater that amplified their voices while concealing their features. But your persona has become something far more sinister than a simple theatrical device. It has become a parasitic entity that feeds upon your life force, growing stronger with each performance while you grow progressively weaker, more hollow, more estranged from the beating heart of your authentic self. Watch yourself tomorrow morning as you prepare for the day. Notice how you adjust your posture before entering the office, how your voice changes when you answer the phone, how you arrange your face into acceptable expressions before greeting your colleagues. These adjustments happen so automatically that you barely register them, yet each one is a small sacrifice offered to the hungry ghost of social conformity. The persona begins innocently enough. As a child, you learned that certain behaviors earned approval, while others brought punishment or rejection. You discovered that crying loudly brought attention but was eventually discouraged, that anger was dangerous but compliance was rewarded, that dreams were beautiful but impractical. Slowly, methodically, you began to prune away the parts of yourself that seemed to cause problems, cultivating only those aspects that garnered acceptance. This pruning felt like wisdom at the time. You were learning to navigate the world, to get your needs met, to survive in a complex social ecosystem. But what you didn't realize was that each discarded aspect of yourself didn't simply disappear. It fell into the shadow that dark repository of all the unlived parts of your personality. Meanwhile, the mask you constructed to replace your natural responses began to take on a life of its own. The persona is a masterful creation, perfectly designed to meet the expectations of your environment. It knows exactly what to say in meetings, how to laugh at jokes that aren't funny, when to express concern about issues you don't actually care about. It has mastered the art of emotional camouflage, becoming so skilled at mimicking appropriate responses that even you believe them to be genuine. But here is the terrible secret the persona doesn't want you to discover. It is not content to be merely a tool you use when necessary. It harbors ambitions of total domination, seeking to become the sole inhabitant of the house of your consciousness. Like a cuckoo bird that lays its eggs in another's nest, the persona wants to push out your authentic self entirely, claiming your entire identity as its domain. This takeover happens gradually, almost imperceptibly. You begin to lose access to your spontaneous responses, your genuine emotions, your natural rhythms and preferences. You find yourself saying things you don't mean, agreeing to commitments that drain you, laughing at moments when you want to cry. The mask has become so heavy, so elaborate, so essential to your daily functioning that removing it feels impossible and terrifying. In the corporate world, this persona possession reaches epidemic proportions. The modern workplace rewards mask wearing to such an extent that authenticity becomes a liability. You learn to speak in euphemisms and corporate jargon, to hide your human needs behind professional competence, to transform your creative impulses into marketable skills. The persona thrives in this environment, growing fat on the energy it siphons from your authentic self. But the cost of this performance is enormous. The constant effort required to maintain the mask creates a kind of psychic exhaustion that no amount of sleep can cure. You feel tired in your bones, not from physical exertion, but from the relentless energy drain of being someone you are not. You experience what Jung called persona fatigue, the deep weariness that comes from living a life that isn't truly yours. The persona also creates a profound loneliness because it prevents genuine connection with others. When you relate to the world through your mask, others can only connect with that mask, never with your true self. You find yourself surrounded by people who know your persona intimately but have never met the real you. This creates a kind of existential isolation. You are alone in the crowd, unknown even to those who think they know you best. Yet the persona serves another purpose that Jung understood deeply. It protects the vulnerable core of your authentic self from a world that might not be ready to receive it. Like the hard shell that protects the tender meat of a nut, the persona shields your deepest nature from environments that could damage or destroy it. The tragedy occurs when the protection becomes a prison, when the shell grows so thick that even you cannot reach the treasure within. The ancient alchemists spoke of the nigredo, the blackening phase of transformation where the false must be dissolved before the true can emerge. In the journey of individuation, there comes a moment when the persona must be recognized for what it is. Not your enemy, but not your identity either. It is a tool that has outlived its usefulness, a costume that you have worn for so long you forgot it was removable. This recognition often comes through crisis, a moment when the mask fails you, when the performance breaks down, when the gap between who you pretend to be and who you actually are becomes too wide to bridge. These moments feel like catastrophes, but they are actually opportunities for liberation, invitations to step out from behind the curtain of false identity and show your true face to the world. The work of dismantling the persona is delicate surgery of the soul. It requires the precision of a master craftsman who can separate the authentic from the artificial without destroying either. You must learn to wear your masks consciously as tools for specific situations rather than allowing them to wear you unconsciously, as permanent fixtures of your identity. This conscious relationship with the persona is one of the great achievements of psychological maturity. You begin to recognize when you are performing and when you are being genuine. You develop the courage to let your authentic responses emerge, even when they are messy or inconvenient. You learn to value the awkward truth over the polished lie, the spontaneous gesture over the calculated response. The goal is not to destroy the persona entirely. That would be psychological suicide in a world that requires some degree of social adaptation. The goal is to free yourself from its tyranny, to reclaim your right to choose when to perform and when to simply be. This is the beginning of psychological freedom, the first step toward becoming who you truly are beneath all the layers of who you thought you needed to be. In the hall of mirrors that is human consciousness, the most terrifying reflection is the one you refuse to see. It stands behind you always, mimicking your movements with perfect precision while remaining forever outside your direct vision. This is your shadow, not the absence of light, but the presence of everything you have deemed unacceptable about yourself, everything you have banished from the kingdom of your conscious identity. The shadow is born in the same moment as the persona, created by the very act of choosing who you will be. For every quality you embrace, another must be rejected. For every virtue you cultivate, a corresponding vice must be denied. The rejected aspects don't simply vanish, they gather in the darkness of the unconscious, forming a parallel personality that contains all the unlived parts of your potential. But the shadow is not content to remain hidden. It seeks expression through the ancient mechanism of projection, casting its dark contents onto the external world like a movie projector, displaying its film on the nearest available screen. What you see out there, the behaviors you find most repulsive, the people who trigger your strongest reactions, the qualities that make your skin crawl with disgust, these are often nothing more than aspects of your own shadow self reflected back to you. Watch yourself in the grip of righteous indignation. Notice how alive you feel when criticizing others, how energized you become when pointing out their flaws. This energy doesn't come from your virtue, but from your shadow, which has found a socially acceptable way to express itself through the condemnation of others. The lazy person you despise carries your own disowned sloth. The arrogant individual who triggers your rage mirrors your own unacknowledged grandiosity. The needy person whose desperation repulses you reflects your own denied hunger for attention and care. Jung discovered this mechanism through his own painful self-examination, recognizing that his most vehement judgments of others were actually unconscious confessions about himself. He wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." This is not mere psychological theory. It is a practical map for psychological archaeology, a way of using the external world as a mirror to discover the hidden contents of your own unconscious. The projection of shadow material serves a dual purpose. On the surface, it appears to protect the ego's self-image by placing unwanted qualities safely outside the self. You can maintain your identity as a good person by ensuring that all the badness exists somewhere else, in other people, other groups, other nations. This mechanism allows you to sleep peacefully in your moral superiority while your shadow roams free in the world, wreaking havoc through unconscious projection. But projection also serves a deeper purpose. It is the psyche's attempt to bring unconscious contents into conscious awareness. The qualities you project most strongly are often the ones most urgently seeking integration. Your shadow uses other people as messengers, trying desperately to get your attention, to force you to recognize and reclaim the lost parts of yourself. The feast of projection is a banquet where you consume your own substance without realizing it. Each judgment you cast outward is a piece of your wholeness served up for sacrifice. Each criticism becomes a form of psychological cannibalism, where you devour aspects of yourself while believing you are nourishing your righteousness. The shadow grows stronger with each feeding, more autonomous, more capable of acting independently of your conscious will. This is why the people who trigger you most powerfully often become obsessions. You cannot stop thinking about them, cannot stop talking about their faults, cannot resist the compulsion to analyze their behavior. You are not actually thinking about them at all. You are wrestling with disowned aspects of yourself, trying to process shadow material that has been projected onto their unfortunate personage. The collective shadow manifests in the same way, but on a massive scale. Entire cultures project their unwanted qualities onto other groups, creating the psychological foundation for racism, nationalism, and war. The enemy becomes the repository for everything the group refuses to acknowledge about itself. The scapegoat mechanism, identified by anthropologist René Girard, is actually a form of collective shadow projection. The community transfers its own violence and corruption onto a sacrificial victim, maintaining its illusion of innocence through ritualized expulsion. But there is a terrible irony in this process. The more energy you invest in fighting your projected shadow, the stronger it becomes. The war on drugs strengthens the drug trade. The war on terror creates more terrorists. The war on your own projected shadow creates more of what you're trying to eliminate. This is the principle Jung called enantiodromia, the tendency of things to transform into their opposite when taken to extremes. The only way to starve the shadow's feast of projection is to withdraw the projections consciously, to recognize your own face in the mirror of your judgments. This requires extraordinary courage and humility. It means admitting that the lazy person you criticized carries your own capacity for sloth, that the cruel individual who appalls you reflects your own potential for cruelty, that the weak person you despise mirrors your own unacknowledged vulnerability. This work of shadow integration is, perhaps, the most difficult aspect of psychological development. It requires you to embrace paradox, to hold both your light and dark qualities simultaneously without splitting them apart. It means acknowledging that you are capable of both great compassion and great cruelty, both profound wisdom and stunning foolishness, both selfless love and narcissistic self-interest. The integration of shadow material doesn't make you a worse person, it makes you a more complete person. When you stop projecting your darkness onto others, you reclaim the energy that was trapped in those projections. You become less judgmental and more compassionate, less reactive and more responsive, less fragmented and more whole. The ancient alchemists knew this secret. They spoke of the union of opposites, the marriage of solar and lunar consciousness, the integration of king and queen within the hermetic vessel of the soul. This is not about becoming perfect, it is about becoming real, about embracing the full spectrum of human potential within yourself, rather than splitting it between heroes and villains in the external world. As you begin to withdraw your projections, something miraculous happens. The people who once triggered you most powerfully begin to lose their charge. The behaviors that once sent you into righteous fury start to feel less threatening. This is not because you have become indifferent to genuine injustice, but because you are no longer using external events as unconscious theaters for your internal dramas. The shadow's feast of projection has kept you hungry while believing you were feeding others. Now, through the courageous work of reclaiming your projections, you can finally begin to nourish yourself with the recovered energy of your own completeness. This is how the shadow transforms from enemy to ally, from source of unconscious reactivity to fountain of creative power and authentic presence. In the temple of your own making, you have become both priest and sacrifice, tending a sacred fire that promises purification but delivers only ash. The altar of perfectionism burns day and night, demanding ever more precious offerings: your spontaneity, your joy, your capacity for play, your acceptance of the beautifully flawed nature of human existence. You feed this fire believing you are creating something divine, not realizing you are immolating the very essence of what makes you alive. Perfectionism masquerades as a virtue, wearing the noble robes of excellence and high standards. It whispers seductive promises in your ear: just a little more effort, just a little more control, and you will finally be worthy of love, respect, approval. It convinces you that your value as a human being depends on the flawlessness of your performance, that any mistake is evidence of fundamental inadequacy, that anything less than perfect is tantamount to failure. But perfectionism is not about excellence. It is about fear. It is the ego's desperate attempt to create an invulnerable self, a fortress of flawlessness that no criticism can penetrate, no rejection can wound. The perfectionist lives in a glass cathedral of their own construction, magnificent in its crystalline beauty but cold, lifeless, and ultimately fragile. One crack in the facade threatens to bring the entire structure crashing down. Jung understood that perfectionism is a defense against the shadow, an attempt to eliminate the possibility of failure, weakness, or inadequacy by controlling every variable in life. The perfectionist cannot tolerate the messy, chaotic, unpredictable nature of genuine human experience. They seek to transform life into a mathematical equation where effort equals outcome, where control guarantees safety, where flawlessness ensures love. Watch the perfectionist at work. Notice how they revise the same email 17 times before sending it, how they agonize over every word in a presentation, how they spend hours arranging objects on their desk in precise geometric patterns. This is not dedication. This is ritual behavior designed to ward off the terrifying possibility of imperfection. Each revision is an incantation, each adjustment a prayer to the gods of flawlessness. The perfectionist's relationship with time is particularly tormented. They live in a perpetual state of not yet ready, not yet good enough, not yet worthy of beginning. Projects remain forever in preparation phase because the risk of imperfect execution is too great to bear. The novel is endlessly outlined but never written. The business plan is refined into paralysis. The relationship is delayed until they become someone worthy of love. This temporal imprisonment creates a cruel paradox. In trying to create something perfect, the perfectionist often creates nothing at all. In trying to avoid the possibility of failure, they guarantee the failure of never trying. In trying to craft the flawless life, they sacrifice the actual living of life on the altar of imaginary future perfection. The pyre of perfectionism consumes not only your own vitality, but radiates outward, burning those around you as well. The perfectionist parent creates children who walk on eggshells, terrified of making mistakes. The perfectionist partner transforms love into performance evaluation. The perfectionist leader creates environments where innovation dies under the weight of impossible standards. But perhaps most tragically, perfectionism murders creativity in its cradle. The creative process is inherently messy, experimental, full of false starts and happy accidents. It requires what Keats called negative capability, the ability to exist in uncertainty and doubt without irritably reaching after fact and reason. The perfectionist cannot tolerate this uncertainty, cannot endure the vulnerable state of not knowing where the creative process will lead. Jung recognized that true creativity emerges from the union of conscious intention and unconscious spontaneity. It requires surrendering control, allowing the unexpected to emerge, embracing the accidents and imperfections that often become the most beautiful aspects of any creation. The perfectionist, in trying to control every aspect of the creative process, strangles the very life force that makes creation possible. The origins of perfectionism often lie in childhood experiences of conditional love. Perhaps you learned that affection came only with achievement, that mistakes resulted in withdrawal of care, that your worth was measured by your performance rather than your inherent being. The child concludes that love must be earned through flawlessness and carries this impossible equation into adulthood. The perfectionist develops what psychologists call an external locus of evaluation. Their sense of worth depends entirely on external validation and achievement. They become addicted to praise and terrified of criticism, unable to generate self-worth from internal sources. This creates a bottomless hunger for external confirmation that no amount of perfect performance can ever satisfy. Yet perfectionism also contains within it the seed of its own transformation. The very intensity of the perfectionist's standards often leads to a crisis of exhaustion, a moment when the cost of maintaining the facade becomes too great to bear. This crisis is actually a gift. It is the psyche's way of forcing a confrontation with the shadow of imperfection, the disowned capacity for mistakes, vulnerability, and ordinary human limitation. The alchemical transformation of perfectionism begins with the radical acceptance of imperfection as not just inevitable, but essential to the creative process of life. It requires learning to see mistakes not as evidence of inadequacy, but as information, feedback from reality about what adjustments might be helpful. It means discovering that vulnerability is not weakness, but the birthplace of courage, creativity, and authentic connection. This transformation asks you to develop what the Japanese call wabi-sabi, the aesthetic appreciation of imperfection, impermanence, and incompleteness. It invites you to find beauty in the crack in the vase, the asymmetry in the garden, the rough edge that reveals the human hand behind the creation. It suggests that your flaws are not bugs in the system, but features that make you uniquely, irreplaceably you. The death of perfectionism is also a resurrection. As you release the impossible dream of flawlessness, you discover the possible joy of being human. You find that people connect more deeply with your struggles than your successes, with your questions than your answers, with your authentic imperfection than your polished performance. The fire that once consumed you in the pyre of perfectionism can be transformed into the warm hearth of self-compassion. Instead of burning your humanity away, you learn to tend the gentle flame of acceptance, allowing it to illuminate rather than incinerate the beautiful, imperfect, gloriously unfinished masterpiece of your becoming. This is not the death of excellence, but its resurrection in a form that nourishes rather than destroys the soul. In the funhouse of modern existence, you stand surrounded by mirrors that stretch to infinity, each reflection showing not your own face but the lives of others, their achievements, their possessions, their apparent happiness gleaming like fool's gold in the distorted light. You have entered the labyrinth of comparison, where every path leads away from your own center and toward the mirage of someone else's perfection. Here, in this hall of endless reflections, your soul grows thin as paper, stretched between who you are and who you think you should be. The trap of comparison is as old as consciousness itself, but never has it been so expertly baited, so perfectly designed to ensnare the wandering mind. Social media has become the great amplifier of human inadequacy, transforming the natural tendency to measure ourselves against others into an industrial-scale operation of self-diminishment. You scroll through curated highlights of other people's lives, comparing your behind-the-scenes struggles with their carefully staged performances, your internal chaos with their external polish. Jung understood that comparison is a function of the inferior complex, that shadowy aspect of the psyche that feels perpetually inadequate, always falling short of some imagined standard. The comparing mind cannot rest in its own experience because it has lost connection with its unique value, its irreplaceable contribution to the symphony of human existence. Instead, it becomes a beggar at the feast of others' lives, hungry for scraps of worth that can never truly nourish the soul. Watch how comparison operates in your daily consciousness. You see a colleague receive recognition and immediately measure your own achievements against theirs. You observe a friend's relationship and find your own wanting by comparison. You witness someone's apparent confidence and feel your own self-doubt magnified. In each instance, you abandon the sacred ground of your own experience to inhabit the imagined territory of another's life. This psychological migration is a form of existential homelessness. You become a refugee in your own life, always looking toward distant shores where the grass appears greener, the sun seems brighter, the possibilities feel more abundant. But this is an optical illusion created by distance and imagination. The closer you move toward any external ideal, the more clearly you see its imperfections, its limitations, its ordinary humanity. The comparison trap operates through a fundamental misconception about the nature of human worth. It assumes that value is a finite resource, that someone else's success diminishes your own potential, that life is a zero-sum game where another's gain must be your loss. This scarcity mindset transforms every relationship into a competition, every achievement into a measurement, every moment of joy into an opportunity for inadequacy. But the most insidious aspect of the comparison trap is how it steals your attention from your own becoming. While you are busy measuring yourself against others, you miss the subtle signs of your own growth, the small victories that mark your unique journey, the particular gifts that are yours alone to offer the world. You become so focused on running someone else's race that you forget you are on a completely different track, heading toward a destination that only you can reach. The ancient Greeks had a word for this condition: pleonexia, the insatiable desire to have more, to be more by comparing oneself to others. They recognized it as a spiritual disease that corrupts the soul's natural contentment with its own unfolding. The pleonexic person can never be satisfied because there will always be someone with more money, more talent, more beauty, more apparent happiness. The finish line of adequacy keeps moving because it is defined by external comparison rather than internal fulfillment. Jung observed that individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, requires stepping out of the collective comparison game entirely. It means recognizing that your path is incomparable because it is uniquely yours, that your timing is perfect because it is authentically your own, that your struggles and triumphs have meaning not because of how they measure against others, but because of how they contribute to your own becoming. This doesn't mean living in denial of reality or avoiding all external feedback. Healthy comparison can provide useful information, inspiration, and motivation. The trap lies in using comparison as a measure of your fundamental worth, rather than as data about different approaches to life's challenges. When comparison becomes identification, when you believe that being different means being deficient, you have entered the funhouse of infinite suffering. The mirror of comparison reflects back everything except what you most need to see: your own irreplaceable essence, your unique contribution to the human story, your particular way of embodying consciousness in this brief dance of existence. While you are busy trying to become someone else, the world is deprived of who you actually are, and so are you. The liberation from comparison begins with the radical recognition that you are not in competition with anyone else, because no one else can live your life. Your struggles are not evidence of failure, but proof of engagement with your particular curriculum in the school of existence. Your timing is not evidence of inadequacy, but reflection of your soul's unique rhythm. Your path is not evidence of poor choice, but manifestation of your deepest wisdom about what you need to learn and become. This recognition requires developing what Jung called your own myth, the understanding that your life is a unique story that has never been told before and will never be told again. You are both the author and the protagonist of this myth, and comparing your story to others is like comparing a symphony to a painting, a poem to a dance. Each art form has its own beauty, its own purpose, its own irreplaceable contribution to the whole. The practice of withdrawing from comparison is like learning to see with your own eyes, rather than through the borrowed vision of others' lives. It means developing an internal compass that points toward your authentic north rather than toward the magnetic pull of others' achievements. It requires cultivating the rare courage to be ordinary in your own extraordinary way, rather than extraordinary in someone else's ordinary way. As you step out of the hall of mirrors, something miraculous begins to happen. The energy you were spending on comparison becomes available for creation. The attention you were giving to others' lives returns to your own unfolding. The worth you were seeking in external validation reveals itself as an inexhaustible resource within your own being. This is not narcissism or self-absorption. It is the foundation of genuine contribution. Only when you stop trying to be someone else can you discover who you actually are. Only when you stop running someone else's race can you find your own finish line. Only when you step out of the comparison trap can you enter the sacred space of your own becoming, where the only competition is with your former self, and the only prize is the joy of being authentically, irreplaceably, gloriously you. In the castle of your psyche stands a throne carved from ancient wounds, upholstered with righteous suffering, adorned with the jewels of justified resentment. Upon this seat of power you reign over a kingdom of diminished possibilities, wearing a crown of thorns that you have learned to mistake for glory. The victim archetype has taken residence in the royal chambers of your identity, transforming your pain into a scepter of control, your trauma into currency of moral superiority. This is not the innocent suffering of the wounded child or the temporary helplessness of genuine crisis. This is something far more complex and ultimately more imprisoning, the unconscious identification with victimhood as identity, the transformation of what happened to you into who you are. The throne calls to you with seductive whispers. Here you are, safe from responsibility, protected from risk, entitled to sympathy, justified in your anger. But what it doesn't tell you is that this safety is also a prison, this protection also a paralysis. Jung understood that the victim archetype serves a crucial function in the early stages of healing. It validates real pain, acknowledges genuine injustice, provides necessary protection during vulnerable recovery, but like all archetypal energies, it can become possessive, overstaying its welcome, transforming from temporary refuge into permanent residence. When this happens, the victim identity becomes what he called a complex, an autonomous piece of the psyche that operates independently of conscious will. The victim's throne is built upon a foundation of undeniable truth. Something terrible did happen to you. Someone did betray your trust, violate your boundaries, wound your innocent heart. The pain is real, the injustice legitimate, the scars authentic. But the throne takes this truth and weaves around it a mythology that extends far beyond the original wound, creating a narrative where you are forever powerless, forever wronged, forever entitled to special consideration because of what was done to you. Watch how the victim complex operates in daily life. It speaks through phrases like, "after everything I've been through," and "given my history," and "considering what happened to me." These statements aren't false. They accurately reference real experiences. But they also serve another function. They create a protective buffer between you and the full responsibility of adult life, a get-out-of-jail-free card for the challenging work of growth and change. The throne provides very real benefits, which is why it's so difficult to abandon. It offers a sense of moral high ground. The victim is always right, always deserving of sympathy, never to blame for their circumstances. It provides a ready explanation for life's disappointments. Not your fault, but the inevitable result of past wounds. It creates a special category of treatment from others, the gentleness, consideration, and accommodation that the wounded deserve. But these benefits come at an enormous cost. The victim's throne is positioned in such a way that it faces permanently backward, toward the wound that created it. From this seat, you cannot see the present moment clearly, cannot perceive emerging opportunities, cannot recognize your own growing strength. You become like Lot's wife, transformed into a pillar of salt by looking back at destruction, unable to move forward into the promised land of possibility. The unconscious attachment to victimhood creates what psychologists call secondary gain, the hidden benefits of staying wounded. These might include avoided responsibility, special treatment from others, righteous anger that feels more powerful than vulnerability, or simply the familiar comfort of a known identity, even if that identity is built around suffering. The secondary gains are real, which makes the choice to leave the throne genuinely difficult. The victim complex also provides protection from the terror of recognizing your own power. If you are truly powerless, then you cannot be held responsible for changing your circumstances. If you are truly at the mercy of others' actions, then you don't have to face the frightening possibility that you might actually be capable of creating a different life. The throne becomes a refuge from the overwhelming responsibility of your own creative potential. But perhaps most tragically, the victim's throne prevents you from accessing the very strength that your wounding was meant to develop. Jung observed that we are wounded precisely in the places where we need to grow strongest. The places of deepest injury often become the sources of greatest wisdom, compassion, and power, but only if we are willing to transform the wound rather than worship it. The ancient Greeks understood this principle in their myths of the wounded healer. Chiron, wounded by one of Heracles' poisoned arrows, could heal everyone except himself. But his incurable wound became the source of his wisdom, his teaching, his ability to guide others through their own healing journeys. The wound didn't disappear. It was transformed from a source of helplessness into a fountain of service. This transformation requires what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold the tension between opposite truths without collapsing into either extreme. Yes, you were wounded, and yes, you are powerful. Yes, you were victimized, and yes, you have choice. Yes, what happened to you was unfair, and yes, what you do next is your responsibility. This is not about denying your pain or minimizing your trauma. It's about refusing to let that trauma define the totality of who you are. The dismantling of the victim's throne is delicate work that cannot be rushed or forced. It requires acknowledging the throne's protective function while gradually outgrowing the need for that protection. It means honoring your wounds while refusing to let them become your identity. It involves grieving not only what was done to you, but also what you might have become if you had continued to define yourself primarily through your suffering. The descent from the victim's throne is actually an ascent into personal power. As you release the secondary gains of victimhood, you discover the primary gains of agency. As you stop looking backward at your wounds, You begin to see forward to your possibilities. As you remove the crown of thorns, you discover that underneath it was always the crown of your own inherent dignity and strength. This doesn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't matter. It means integrating your wounding into a larger story of resilience, transformation, and ultimately, service. The throne dissolves, but what remains is something far more valuable. The hard-won wisdom that comes from choosing healing over helplessness, growth over grievance, possibility over the prison of perpetual pain. This is how the victim becomes the victor, not by conquering others, but by reclaiming sovereignty over their own becoming. In the blue glow of endless screens, you have constructed a new altar to an ancient hunger, the desperate desire to be seen, to be connected, to matter in the vast indifference of existence. But this digital temple demands a sacrifice more complete than any flesh and blood deity ever required. Your presence itself, your capacity for unmediated reality, your ability to exist without the constant validation of virtual witnesses. You have become both worshiper and offering in the church of perpetual connectivity, feeding your attention, that most precious currency of consciousness, to algorithms that grow fat on your distraction while your actual life grows thin as a forgotten dream. The digital demon is not the technology itself, but what Jung would recognize as a complex that has colonized your relationship with technology. It operates through the ancient mechanisms of the psyche, the need for belonging, the fear of missing out, the hunger for stimulation, the terror of boredom and solitude. But it has found in digital media the perfect delivery system for these primal drives, a way to trigger them continuously, compulsively, without ever truly satisfying them. Watch yourself reach for your phone in moments of silence, in gaps between activities, in the vulnerable spaces where thoughts might arise or feelings might surface. This reaching is not conscious. It happens automatically, like a reflex, as if the device were a pacifier for the anxious infant of your modern mind. You have developed what researchers call continuous partial attention, a state of constant low-level distraction that prevents you from ever being fully present to any single experience. The demon feeds on this fragmentation of attention. Each notification is a hook, each ping a summons, each red notification badge a demand for immediate response. Your nervous system, evolved to respond to genuine threats and opportunities, cannot distinguish between a saber-toothed tiger and a social media alert. Both trigger the same stress response, the same flood of cortisol and adrenaline, the same compulsive need to check, to respond, to engage. But the true genius of the digital demon lies in its ability to simulate connection while delivering isolation, to promise community while creating loneliness, to offer infinite stimulation while generating profound emptiness. You scroll through the highlight reels of others' lives, experiencing what psychologists call compare and despair, the inevitable depression that comes from measuring your behind-the-scenes reality against others' carefully curated performances. The algorithm becomes your new unconscious, learning your patterns, predicting your desires, feeding you an endless stream of content designed to keep you engaged, not enlightened. It knows you better than you know yourself in some ways, tracking every click, every pause, every moment of engagement to construct a digital profile of your psychological vulnerabilities. This profile is then used to deliver precisely the kind of content that will trigger your deepest insecurities, your strongest compulsions, your most addictive patterns. Jung would recognize in this process the projection of the self, that archetypal image of wholeness and meaning, onto the digital realm. You begin to believe that your worth is measured by likes, that your identity is constructed through posts, that your relationships exist primarily through screens. The digital persona becomes more real than your actual presence, more important than your immediate relationships, more compelling than your direct experience of reality. The demon is particularly clever in how it exploits your natural human need for narrative and meaning. Social media platforms transform your life into a performance, each moment potentially becoming content, each experience valued primarily for its potential to generate engagement. You begin to live your life as if you were the star of your own reality show, constantly performing for an imagined audience, curating your experiences for maximum digital impact. This performative existence creates a profound dissociation from authentic experience. You're at a beautiful sunset, but instead of feeling its beauty, you're thinking about how to photograph it. You're having dinner with friends, but part of your attention is crafting the perfect caption. You're experiencing a moment of joy or sorrow, but you're already planning how to share it, how to package it for consumption by your digital audience. The digital demon also feeds on what Jung called the participation mystique, the unconscious identification with others' experiences. Through social media, you begin to live vicariously, through influencers, celebrities, and even friends, experiencing their travels, their meals, their relationships, as if they were your own. This creates a kind of psychological vampirism where you consume others' experiences instead of creating your own. The most insidious aspect of this digital possession is how it fragments your capacity for deep states of consciousness, contemplation, reflection, sustained attention, genuine intimacy. These states require what researchers call cognitive quiet, periods of unstimulated awareness where the mind can settle, integrate, and connect with deeper layers of experience. The digital demon ensures that such periods never occur, filling every gap with stimulation, every silence with noise. But the demon also creates what appears to be its opposite, the terror of disconnection, the anxiety that arises when you're separated from your devices. This isn't actually the fear of missing something important. It's the fear of facing your own mind without digital anesthesia, of encountering silence that might reveal what you've been running from, of experiencing the presence that digital distraction was designed to avoid. The liberation from digital possession requires what the ancient mystics called custody of the eyes, the conscious choice of where to direct your attention. It means recognizing that every moment of attention given to a screen is a moment stolen from direct experience. Every hour spent in digital space is an hour not spent in embodied presence. This doesn't require becoming a digital hermit or rejecting technology entirely. It requires developing a conscious relationship with these tools, using them with intention rather than being used by them compulsively. It means creating sacred spaces of disconnection, meals without phones, conversations without interruption, walks without podcasts, moments of genuine solitude where you can remember what it feels like to be fully present to your own existence. The digital demon loses its power when you withdraw the projection of meaning onto virtual experiences and reclaim your capacity for direct engagement with reality, when you stop seeking validation through likes and start finding worth in presence, when you stop consuming others' experiences and start creating your own, when you stop performing your life and start living it. In the silence that emerges when the screens go dark, you might rediscover something miraculous, the richness of your own inner life, the depth of unmediated experience, the profound satisfaction of being fully present to the one life you have been given to live. This is how the digital demon transforms from master to servant, from possessor to tool, from thief of attention to supporter of authentic presence. In the marketplace of human approval, you have become both merchant and beggar, selling pieces of your authentic self for the coins of external validation while extending your bowl for the scraps of others' acknowledgement. This is the cruel economy of the approval addiction, a system where your worth fluctuates like a stock price based on the unpredictable reactions of others, where your inner sun is eclipsed by the shifting weather of external opinion, where you learn to hunger for nourishment that can never truly feed the soul. The approval addiction begins innocently enough, in the natural dependency of childhood, where survival literally depends on pleasing those who care for you. The infant who cries receives attention. The child who behaves receives love. The adolescent who achieves receives pride. These early experiences create neural pathways that equate approval with safety, rejection with danger, external validation with existential security. But what serves survival in childhood becomes a prison in adulthood, transforming you into an emotional beggar forever dependent on the charity of others' opinions. Jung understood this pattern as the tyranny of the collective over the individual, the way social pressure can crush the tender shoots of authentic selfhood before they have a chance to take root. He observed how people will sacrifice their deepest convictions, their most cherished dreams, their most essential truths on the altar of social acceptance. The approval addict lives in perpetual exile from their own center, constantly adjusting their position based on the compass of others' reactions rather than the true north of their inner guidance. Watch yourself in social situations. Notice how you shapeshift to match the energy of those around you, how you modulate your opinions based on what you think others want to hear, how you suppress aspects of your personality that might provoke disapproval. This chameleon-like adaptation happens so automatically that you may not even recognize you're doing it. You have become a master of reading rooms and adjusting accordingly, but in the process, you've lost the ability to simply be yourself, regardless of the audience. The approval addiction operates through what psychologists call external locus of control. The belief that your emotional well-being depends on factors outside yourself. This creates a terrible vulnerability because you have placed your peace, your joy, your sense of worth in the hands of others who may be distracted, unavailable, or simply having a bad day. Your emotional weather becomes completely dependent on the unpredictable climate of other people's moods and reactions. This dependency creates a vicious cycle. The more desperately you seek approval, the more likely you are to engage in behaviors that ultimately generate disapproval. Neediness repels. Desperation creates distance. The hunger for validation often pushes away the very people whose acceptance you crave. You become like a moth drawn to the flame of attention, not recognizing that your desperation is precisely what makes you less attractive to others. The false self that emerges from this dynamic is a masterpiece of social engineering, perfectly calibrated to generate positive responses from others but completely disconnected from your authentic desires, values, and expressions. This false self knows exactly what to wear to impress, what to say to charm, how to behave to fit in. But it's built on the foundation of self-abandonment, constructed from the materials of who you think you should be rather than who you actually are. The energy required to maintain this false self is enormous. You're constantly monitoring others' reactions, adjusting your performance, managing your image. It's like trying to keep a dozen plates spinning in the air simultaneously, exhausting work that leaves little energy for the actual living of your life. You become so busy managing how you appear to others that you forget to discover who you are when no one is watching. The approval addiction also creates a profound loneliness because the relationships you form are based on false pretenses. People may like the version of you that you present for their approval, but they don't know the real you, and neither do you. You're surrounded by connections that feel hollow because they're based on performance rather than authenticity, on who you pretend to be rather than who you actually are. Jung recognized that this external orientation prevents the development of what he called the transcendent function, the ability to find meaning and value from within rather than from without. The approval addict never learns to validate their own experiences, to trust their own perceptions, to value their own growth and development independent of external recognition. They remain forever dependent on others for a sense of worth that can only truly come from within. The withdrawal from approval addiction is like recovery from any other dependency. It involves tolerance for the discomfort that arises when you stop getting your usual fix, when you begin to act from authentic impulse rather than calculated effect. Some people may indeed disapprove. Some relationships may shift or end. Some opportunities may be lost. This temporary loss creates intense anxiety because your nervous system interprets disapproval as existential threat. But as you develop tolerance for disapproval, something miraculous begins to happen. You discover that most people's reactions to your authenticity are actually more positive than their responses to your performance. Genuine expression tends to evoke genuine connection. Real vulnerability invites real intimacy. Authentic presence creates space for others to be authentic as well. More importantly, you begin to develop an internal source of validation, the capacity to approve of yourself based on your own values, your own growth, your own integrity, rather than others' reactions. You learn to find worth in the courage to be genuine, rather than in the skill to be pleasing, in the strength to stand alone rather than in the ability to blend in the wisdom to honor your own truth rather than in the cleverness to say what others want to hear. This internal validation doesn't make you indifferent to others' opinions. It makes you free to consider them without being enslaved by them. You can receive feedback without being devastated by criticism, accept compliments without being addicted to praise, engage with others without losing yourself in the process. The approval of others becomes a gift you can receive rather than a drug you desperately need. The hunger of the false self gives way to the nourishment of authentic being. Instead of seeking approval for who you pretend to be, you find acceptance for who you actually are. Instead of earning love through performance, you discover the love that is your birthright simply for existing. Instead of begging for validation from others, you become the source of your own approval, finally feeding yourself from the inexhaustible wellspring of your own authentic worth. In the twilight realm between intention and action lies a shadow kingdom ruled by the master of delay, the sovereign of someday, the emperor of endless preparation. Here, in this liminal space where dreams decompose like autumn leaves, you have become both prisoner and warden of your own potential, forever rehearsing for a performance that never begins, eternally preparing for a journey that never commences. This is the domain of procrastination, not laziness as the world believes, but a sophisticated form of self-sabotage that masquerades as rest while actively stealing from your future self. The procrastination paradox lies in its seductive promise of choice. I could do this now, it whispers, but I choose to wait until later, when conditions will be more favorable, when I feel more motivated, when the timing is perfect. This appears to be an exercise of free will, but it is actually a surrender of agency disguised as empowerment. You believe you are choosing delay, but delay is choosing you, keeping you perpetually pregnant with possibilities that never come to birth. Jung would recognize procrastination as a symptom of what he called the provisional life, the unconscious belief that real living will begin someday in the future, that the present moment is merely preparation for the authentic existence that awaits once certain conditions are met. The procrastinator lives always in the anteroom of their own life, forever getting ready to enter the main hall where the real celebration is supposed to take place. But procrastination is not simply avoidance of task completion. It is avoidance of selfhood itself. When you delay starting the novel, you avoid discovering whether you are truly a writer. When you postpone the difficult conversation, you avoid facing your capacity for conflict and resolution. When you defer the creative project, you protect yourself from the vulnerability of genuine expression. Procrastination becomes a way of avoiding the terrifying possibility of fully inhabiting your own life. The master of delay is particularly clever in how it exploits your relationship with time. It creates the illusion of infinite tomorrows, as if time were a renewable resource rather than a depleting account. There will always be more time, it assures you, even as your mortal hours tick away like water through cupped hands. This temporal delusion allows you to spend today's energy on avoidance while borrowing against tomorrow's motivation, a psychological debt that compounds with interest. Watch how procrastination operates in your daily experience. It begins with a task or opportunity that requires you to show up fully, to risk failure, to potentially disappoint yourself or others. Instead of engaging directly with this vulnerability, you negotiate with delay. I'll do it later when I'm more prepared, more motivated, more certain of success. This negotiation feels reasonable, but it's actually a sophisticated form of emotional regulation. You're managing anxiety by deferring it rather than moving through it. The procrastinator becomes an expert in what psychologists call temporal discounting, the tendency to value immediate comfort over future benefit. The discomfort of starting feels enormous in the present moment, while the pain of not having started feels distant and abstract. You trade the concrete distress of beginning for the theoretical regret of never trying, not realizing that the latter compound into a much heavier burden over time. But procrastination also serves a hidden psychological function. It protects you from the full weight of your own creative power. If you never fully commit to your projects, you never have to confront the magnitude of what you might be capable of creating. If you never start the business, you never have to face the possibility of building something extraordinary. If you never write the book, you never have to encounter the depth of wisdom that might emerge through the process. This protection comes at an enormous cost. The energy that could be flowing into creative expression becomes dammed up, creating internal pressure that manifests as restlessness, anxiety, and a vague sense of wasting your life. You become like a river blocked by debris. The water grows stagnant instead of flowing toward its natural destination. The procrastinator often experiences what Jung called creative constipation, the painful backing up of unexpressed potential. The temporal thief also steals your relationship with your future self. When you procrastinate, you're essentially borrowing from tomorrow's energy, assuming that your future self will be more motivated, more disciplined, more capable than your present self. But this creates a psychological debt that your future self must pay with interest. Not only the work that was deferred, but the additional burden of disappointment and self-recrimination. The most insidious aspect of procrastination is how it transforms you into a time traveler who lives everywhere except the present moment. You dwell in the past, ruminating about all the opportunities you've missed, or in the future, fantasizing about all the things you'll accomplish someday. Meanwhile, the only moment where action is possible, this moment, slips by unnoticed and unused. But procrastination also contains within itself the seeds of its own transformation. The very discomfort that drives delay can become the fuel for action when you learn to move toward discomfort rather than away from it. The anxiety that creates avoidance can be reconceptualized as excitement, the body's way of preparing you for something significant. The liberation from procrastination begins with recognizing that there is no perfect moment to begin, no ideal conditions for starting, no guarantee of success before trying. The only certainty is that not starting guarantees not finishing. that not trying ensures not succeeding, that waiting for perfect conditions means waiting forever. This doesn't mean rushing into action without preparation, but rather distinguishing between necessary preparation and elaborate avoidance. It means developing what yogis call witness consciousness, the ability to observe your own patterns of delay without judgment while choosing different action. It requires cultivating what Zen masters call beginner's mind, the willingness to start imperfectly rather than not starting at all. The recovery of stolen time happens not through massive action, but through tiny beginnings, what the Japanese call kaizen, the art of continuous small improvement. Instead of waiting for tomorrow's mythical motivation, you learn to work with today's actual energy. Instead of requiring perfect conditions, you create workable conditions. Instead of demanding certainty of outcome, you develop tolerance for uncertainty of process. As you reclaim your relationship with time and action, something profound shifts in your experience of life. The present moment transforms from a waiting room into the main event. Your future self becomes a collaborator rather than a creditor. Your dreams begin to migrate from the realm of fantasy into the territory of lived experience. This is how the procrastination paradox resolves. Not through perfect action, but through imperfect beginning. Not through elimination of delay, but through conscious choice to start anyway. In the secret garden of your heart, you have planted seeds of bitterness in soil, watered by tears of injustice, tended by the careful hands of righteous anger, fertilized by the rich compost of remembered wrongs. Here, in this shadowed sanctuary, you cultivate resentment like a master gardener, nurturing grievances until they grow into thorny forests that block out the light of present joy. Each grudge becomes a gravestone, marking the death of possibility, each bitter root extending deeper into the earth of your being, each poisonous flower blooming in defiance of forgiveness. This is the garden where time stands still, where past wounds remain forever fresh, where the seasons of healing never come. You tend this dark paradise with religious devotion, watering old hurts with fresh rehearsals of injustice, pruning away any growth that might lead toward reconciliation or release. The gardener of grudges believes they are preserving important truths about betrayal and violation, not recognizing that they are actually preserving the power of those who wounded them to continue wounding them indefinitely. Jung understood resentment as a form of psychological possession, where the injured party becomes haunted by the ghost of the one who harmed them. The resentful person carries their perpetrator with them always, like a demon riding on their shoulders, whispering poison in their ear, ensuring that the original wound never heals, but instead becomes the central organizing principle of their emotional life. The person who hurt you has taken up permanent residence in your psyche, continuing their destructive work long after they've left your actual life. Watch how resentment operates in your daily consciousness. Notice how quickly your mind returns to the scene of the injury, how it replays the offense with cinematic detail, how it constructs elaborate fantasies of revenge or vindication. These mental rehearsals feel important, even necessary. Surely you must not forget, must not let them get away with it, must not appear weak by releasing your anger. But each rehearsal deepens the groove of grievance in your neural pathways, making it easier to slide back into resentment and harder to climb out into freedom. The grudge garden thrives on what Buddhists call the second arrow, the additional suffering we create by our reaction to the original suffering. The first arrow is what was done to you, the betrayal, the abandonment, the abuse, the injustice. This arrow causes genuine pain that requires acknowledgement, care, and healing. But the second arrow is what you do to yourself afterward, the endless rumination, the bitter rehearsals, the chronic anger that turns your emotional bloodstream acidic with poison. Resentment promises to be your protector, your advocate, your loyal defender against future harm. It whispers seductive lies. If you let go of your anger, you'll be vulnerable again. If you forgive, you'll be weak. If you release this grudge, you'll be betraying yourself. But these promises are false. Resentment doesn't protect you, it imprisons you. It doesn't make you strong, it keeps you perpetually wounded. It doesn't defend you, it ensures that you remain forever at the mercy of those who have already harmed you. The most tragic aspect of the grudge garden is how it transforms you into the very thing you despise in others. The person who wounded you becomes your unconscious teacher, showing you how to hold anger, how to nurse grievances, how to make others pay for your pain. You begin to treat new people in your life with the suspicion earned by old betrayers, to punish present relationships for past crimes, to see potential enemies where there might be friends. Jung observed that resentment is often a defense against grief, the raw, vulnerable sorrow of loss that lies beneath the protective armor of anger. It's easier to be furious than heartbroken, simpler to blame than to mourn, more empowering to seek revenge than to acknowledge the depth of your disappointment. Anger feels active and powerful. Grief feels passive and vulnerable. But grief is actually the gateway to healing, while anger is the guardian that keeps you stuck in the wound. The cultivation of resentment also serves a hidden function. It provides a ready explanation for life's difficulties, a scapegoat for your own failures and limitations. As long as you can blame your struggles on what was done to you, you don't have to confront your own responsibility for what you do next. The grudge becomes a comfortable prison where you are forever the innocent victim and they are forever the guilty perpetrator, a simple moral universe where complexity and personal agency need not apply. But the garden of grudges exacts a terrible toll on the gardener. The poison you cultivate for others seeps into your own system, creating what doctors recognize as chronic stress, inflammation, and illness. Resentment literally makes you sick, not metaphorically, but physiologically. The body cannot distinguish between present danger and remembered betrayal, so it maintains a constant state of alert that exhausts your immune system and accelerates aging. The transformation of the grudge garden begins with the radical recognition that forgiveness is not about them, it's about you. It's not about excusing their behavior or pretending the harm didn't happen. It's about refusing to let their actions continue to poison your present experience. Forgiveness is the ultimate act of self-care, the decision to stop drinking poison and hoping they will die. This doesn't mean forgetting what happened or naively trusting those who have proven untrustworthy. It means releasing your attachment to the story of victimization, your investment in their punishment, your need for their acknowledgement or apology. It means choosing your freedom over their debt, your peace over their punishment, your future over their past actions. The dismantling of resentment is delicate work that cannot be rushed or forced. It begins with curiosity rather than judgment, with compassion rather than criticism. What is this anger protecting? What grief lies beneath this rage? What would it feel like to release this burden that you've been carrying for so long? As you begin to clear the thorny underbrush of old grudges, something miraculous happens. Light begins to penetrate the shadowed spaces of your heart. Energy that was bound up in the maintenance of anger becomes available for new growth. The soil that was poisoned by bitterness becomes fertile ground for forgiveness, compassion, and ultimately, love. The garden transforms from a cemetery of dead relationships into a sanctuary of living possibility. Instead of tending graves, you tend growing things. Instead of cultivating poison, you cultivate peace. Instead of feeding the ghosts of past betrayals, you nourish the seeds of future joy. This is the ultimate alchemy, transmuting the lead of resentment into the gold of liberation, transforming the very wounds that seem to destroy you into the wisdom that finally sets you free.